Hello, and welcome to a belated beginning of week 7 as you folks have carried on and doing this work despite my not posting this video. So I apologize for not getting around to this until today, but here we go. Best that I can. If you've been waiting for some explanations of some of the assignments here, let's get to it. Now we enter into chapter 9 and we're introduced to Viktor Frankl, Rollo May, and the representation that they have of the existentialist. Now, this is deeply, deeply rooted in philosophy. Existentialism existed on par with the emerging philosophies that gave us psychology. Psychology then adopting, I could say, scientific principles in order to demonstrate its knowledge. Philosophers are not burdened by that scientific need, proofs and whatnot. It's simply the application of logic. So we have Kierkegaard in there, we have Nietzsche, and the kind of, humanities, our existence is we're going to die and we just need to survive until that time. Kind of a nihilistic sort of perspective there. And Sartre, who actually contributed a lot to psychology there. And those are individuals that thought about the human experience and what it meant to be a human being with our self-awareness, understanding of our own end, and all these things that we don't necessarily assume any other beings on Earth have. So uniqueness to the human experience. The specific into these philosophies that made their way into the existential movement within psychology, we have Viktor Frankl and Rollo May. Now, Viktor Frankl's personal story is very relevant. Viktor Frankl was a survivor of the Holocaust. He was in a concentration camp. And he encountered aspects of the human experience under extreme threatening conditions. So this is a unique perspective that he walks away with. How do individuals, not only physically, but psychologically and socially, survive such atrocious experiences? So his philosophy was that the individuals that he observed that did well, and he's probably talking about himself as well, the reason why he did well, kind of a relative term, but the reason why he was able to survive that, he recognized that people embraced the need for their lives to have meaning, that there was a purpose for their existence. We see that idea reflected in almost nearly every religious faith, in all of the self-help areas, all the ways in which we improve ourselves, that our lives are meaningful. They're meaningful to us, they're meaningful to other people, and maybe they were part of some grand design. So he said what he observed were individuals that did things, encountered human beings, and their attitudes toward pain and suffering. That those three areas were principal components of the search for meaning. Title of his book, by the way, Search for Meaning. Now, he also developed an approach to helping people referred to as logotherapy. Now, logos is knowledge. So say psychology, biology, that Latin root has to do with the knowledge. So the knowledge of the psyche is psychology or logos. So logotherapy is the idea that someone can gain understanding and meaning by exposing themselves to the great minds and ideas of humanity by reading. So when I was first introduced to logotherapy in my first couple of years of college, It was almost like bibliotherapy. It was like, well, read this book and then read this book and read this book. Great thoughts and great minds. It would allow someone to be able to see and experience the deeds of others, the interactions of others, and how others experienced and processed pain and suffering. And that those were uh, principal ways in which somebody got on the pathway to thriving. And so that was his contribution to an and this remains. This is a logotherapy can be an adjunctive aspect of someone's therapy. We see it all the time. You go to therapy and you have a particular issue, and then hey, to start off, let's look at this particular book that's come out about let's look at the wisdom that's in that book and see how much of that applies to you. That kind of thing. That we can address some of this by looking at the wisdom of our world. Now, the first discussion, I'm going to explain this a little different. The first discussion has to do with this. So in the first discussion, chapter 9, discussion A, looking at deeds, interactions with humans, with other people, and attitudes towards pain and suffering. I want you to share with each other incidences of those in your life that have been particularly meaningful. In fact, you probably imagine right off certain circumstances that have happened. Sometimes we focus on the pain because those are the most memorable. Oftentimes, they're painful things that then have led us to new insights. But we can also like interactions that we've had with individuals that were profound, and then of course maybe random acts of kindness, or maybe deeds that were done to you. You were the recipient of something that made you, oh wow, I think I can trust in humanity. Or maybe somebody did something to you and it caused you to question the goodness of humanity. Those kinds of things. Keep it cool. Share those things, support each other through those discussions. We send over here now, we look at Rollo May. Now, Rollo May fits into the existential point of view because his primary focus was that anxiety, although also triggered by day-to-day sort of thoughts and worries and whatnot, is ultimately triggered by the fact that we know our lives are going to end, and we fear that there might be nothing after that. An existential crisis of I'm living all this life, and then when I die, there's nothingness. And that perspective was the energy source for all of anxiety. Now he categorized that some people process that pretty normally, and then some people experience that anxiety very abnormally. And though that relieving that anxiety, let's say for someone who has substance abuse issues, could in part be quelling that super high anxiety of dying to nothingness by avoiding reality through the ingestion of drugs and whatnot. Now, it doesn't downplay the day-to-day sort of anxieties that happen that also contribute to those behaviors, but it points at that ultimate existential anxiety as the core source of all that energy. He talked about, and I refer to it in the course book, about competitiveness and hostility, and the whole idea of objective and subjective experiencing in life, that these are sources that energy from the ultimate existential worry were manifested in those areas. And I wanted to look at that last one, the objective versus subjective. This is to me, I interpret this very closely to the perspectives that we have of internal and external locus of control. It's another theory, another philosophy having to do with where do we localize the causal factors of the events in our lives. So people who have internal or specific to a particular event in their life, if they have internal locus of control, they can essentially say, that's my fault. Either I studied well and practiced and I was successful, and that's my fault, or I failed to study, failed to practice, and I failed, and that's my fault. That's an expression of internal owning of the responses and the products of your life. External locus of control situates the causal factors outside of ourselves. So I failed because the professor didn't like me, the test was too hard, the material's too hard, there's other things going on in my life. Those kinds of things are the reasons why I failed. And in addition, I succeeded because I'm a favorite. I'm getting away with things. They're giving me favors in grading. I don't really deserve this, kind of thing. Again, all of this idea that there's this external causation. Now, the truth is, it's a combination of that, like nature versus nurture. Like almost every question in psychology, when you have those dichotomies, right? It's always a little bit of both. But when we look at when we look at Viktor Frankl and his say attitudes about pain and suffering, that kind of relates to this notion of, if I'm going through something, not a beating or a not or any sort of abuse or anything like that. Those, of course, have to be understood in a different way. But if I experience failure, to what degree do I own my parts of that failure, and what degree can I rationally say that they were due to external circumstances? And that makes all the difference. An individual who approaches failure as an opportunity to improve, or is it an opportunity to reassert a negative self-view or poor self-esteem or low efficacy or stuff like that? So that this kind of way in which we approach challenges or pain and suffering, what we get from Frankl, here we have that re-expressed in Rollo May. Now, his approach to both of these people were therapists, so his approach to helping people move through their lives when they encountered these things had to do with intentionality. This is a very, very popular term right now that's resurfaced with no reference really to Rollo May as its origins, not only because Rollo May's philosophies have they're not currently, pursued as a separate area within psychology, but these are somewhat universal, and they exist within other philosophies, this idea of intentional action. So when we think about anxiety itself, this kind of goes back to Freud too, because Freud's major thing was anxiety and how we deal with that, and all the different ways which we have defenses against that, and all the ways it can manifest in us in very dysfunctional ways. We have Rollo May says that intentionality provides us with the opportunity to think through everything we do and to be present in the very moment, and not focused on anxiety, which has a in the pop psychology, we say something's living rent free in your brain. You're worried about something, and intentionality is being in the moment. Very Zen in terms of its philosophy, like not worrying about the past, not worrying about the future, and being present in the moment. So even mindfulness is another term today that really links to this idea of intentionality, that we embrace the activity that we're doing in the moment. And he also said love, connection with other people, was a way in which we reduced this anxiety. So if he was sitting with somebody and working on whatever, if he had a patient or client, he would talk about the importance of social connection to reduce this anxiety. We're all in this together. And then intentionality about how I approach everyday tasks and trying to remain in the moment and enjoying the moment. discussion number 2. So chapter 9, discussion 2, I'm asking you to think about intentionality in your life and how you practice that. Now, I'm going to give you an example of something that I do. I try to practice intentionality all the time, and I fail all the time. But I'm going to describe one. There's when I actually enjoy washing dishes, and no, I'm not for hire. I wash my own dishes. But I enjoy washing dishes. I even have a dishwasher, but I still enjoy. It's one of those activities that you see the product right in front of you, it's like mowing the lawn and all. I like that too. And washing there's also a sensory experience. I have super hot water. My hands enjoy almost like a hot sauna bath, because I really, it's very pleasant for my hands to be in the water and stuff like that. And when I'm washing dishes, I get I intend and I get really focused on just like the smoothness of the plate, the cleanliness of the plate, the way the surfactant product, the soap creates that ability for the water to, it reduces the turgor pressure of the water, and the whole science behind why soap works, all of that thing, and then rinsing it off, and then and I'm very in the moment, and I find it to be very liberating. In while I'm doing the dishes, I'm not thinking about the past, not thinking about the future, and it's trying not to, at least, and it can be a very liberating sort of break from the day-to-day kind of stuff, and just so making that intentional. It's like I'm going to focus on just paying attention here rather than thinking what I'm going to do after the dishes. I'm going to just do the dishes and be right in that moment. And I'm an amateur practitioner of this. There may be some of you out there that I practice mindfulness activities quite frequently. I do them when I can, and I find them beneficial to be in dealing with everyday stress. So there's something to be said for Rollo May's and many other philosophies saying that intentional mindfulness is a powerful tool that we have at any moment. It's like therapy available 24/7. Something is stressing you out. You're outside, pick up a rock, feel the rock, examine the rock, just do something, take a walk in nature and just experience that. Just really focus on the physicality and the experience of that thing just to give yourself a break. You can return to answering the problems of the world a little later. So very powerful tools coming from these individuals here, and their perspective on personality. Now, the last thing that comes up here is one of the ways in which historically we have created meaning is through myths. Now, there's a whole scholastic world of mythology that not only names the characters, but examines themes that exist cross-cultural. So when the ancient world was trying to figure out how the world works, how people work, what was our place in the universe, that storytelling with characters that represented these ideas, these concepts related to the existence of a human being, were personified, and their actions and interactions and whatnot really played out and provided a sense of understanding. When it was stormy out, the gods were having an argument, and it explained why there was a storm. The cause-effect relationships, without the benefit of science, had to be mythologized. I think that's the word, mythologized. Now there's the ancient myths. There's religious myths. For some people, those are not myths. There's literature. We look at logotherapy. We're right back up there. When you read, just look at modern literature. Just look at the story of Harry Potter in the Harry Potter series is a modern myth. It addresses existential issues in relation to one's place in the world. Without Harry had to face the consequences of his life with no choices. No, well, of course, Dumbledore says it's all about choices, right? So I'll give him that. But he's faced with these things, the prophecy and all that stuff. If you're familiar with the story, he's in a pattern of things that happened to him. That he was an abused kid. I don't know if you really can really latch onto that idea, but he was incredibly abused and neglected, and ultimately abused and neglected within the wizarding world in some ways. And so the tremendously powerful story, probably at least one of the many reasons why that story is so popular. And kids gravitate to these. What would Harry do in these situations? How is he going to deal with these things? So modern literature coming up with that. Another one, comic books, superheroes, the Marvel universe. All of these things are ways in which we try to understand things like justice and inequality and ancient stories of rescue and redemption and all of these playing out in fiction. There are many people that work in the world of mythology that say a lot is lost when we don't have personal mythology that we turn to give our lives meaning. Now, for some people, that journey involves religion, and mythology is no longer myth. It may be in the fundamentalist perspective of the Christian church, the events of the Bible actually happened exactly the way they were. This is an accurate historical record. For others, it's not that way. I mean, it's allegorical. These are stories that represent ideas. What does the flood mean? What does the crucifixion mean? To die and then rise again, to be, looking at it more from a philosophical rather than a historical sense. So it retains that sort of mythology component to it, depending on that person's belief systems. And we see that across the board in different religions. I could speak authoritatively about that one. I'm sure many of you can cover this in your particular religion, that concept of the line between mythology and historical record. But many people that work in that area believe that having stories to explain the mysteries of our existence are vital for us to connect to others and to have a sense of meaning in our world. And having that meaning, look at it's important because the alternative is meaninglessness. That is an unpleasant state of affairs for things to be. This is meaningless. We're back to Nietzsche, right? Life is meaningless except to survive until you die. So you're going to do everything to survive and ultimately fail. Very nihilistic kind of view of the human experience, but it reminds us of his deeper philosophy was like, again, we're in that moment. Better enjoy it while it's going on. Make the best out of it that you can, because it's a struggle. And so you see in this area of existential psychology, explaining personality, but also explaining how people change, we see some deep influences of different philosophies having to do with the existence and the meaning associated with being human. So there we have Chapter 9, Discussion A, on the ways in which you have created meaning with deeds, interactions, and your attitudes toward pain and suffering. And then we have Chapter 9, Discussion B, where you're going to be looking at intentionality, ways in which, sorry about that was my phone going off, ways in which intentionality affects your experience of day-to-day life. I think this would be two very rich discussions. Thinking about how you guys have taken on these discussions before, I'm really looking forward to seeing how you're going to take these on. So enjoy this time to share at this level, and how you bring meaning into your life. And I will see you online, and take care.